I'm Regie Routman, and I'm here today with my colleague and good friend, Matt Renwick. And I'm an educator and I'm an author. I'm the author of, most recently, The Heart-Centered Teacher, Restoring Hope, Joy, and Possibility in Uncertain Times. And this is one of many conversations that I plan to be doing with colleagues at all levels in our field over the next several years. So welcome, Matt. And we're going to be talking a lot today about your work and your illustrious career and what that means for literacy today. You are an author and a podcaster and a blogger, as well as you have been a teacher and a principal and a district leader, and now a systems coach. And I want you to talk about that and the whole role of coaching and what that means for all of us as educators. Matt and I met for the very first time in 2012 in Madison, Wisconsin, and he attended a literacy and leadership workshop that I was conducting with colleagues. And I think, and he can tell you more about that, he was a little skeptical at first. So we've gotten to know each other professionally and personally over many years. It's just such a pleasure. He is the author of this wonderful book called Leading Like a Coach, 5 Strategies for Supporting Teaching and Learning. And I was privileged to, when he asked me to write or I think I volunteered, to write the foreword for your book. And he says here that the goal of Leading Like a Coach is nurturing self-directed leaders and learners among your staff, developing a school culture that can sustain itself beyond one's tenure. And a lot of what you write about and in the work that you're doing today is really about that building of the school culture. So let's get started. We are going to be about a half hour and talking about major issues in education, and hope that this will be practical and also inspirational for people that are watching or listening in.
Yeah, well, thanks, Regie, and congratulations on your book. I was lucky enough to be one of the earliest readers on it, and just so impressed of how this book came about. It really transcends genres. It's a memoir. It's a letter to educators. It's a summarization of all the good work you've done, and I've been extremely fortunate. I'm glad I lost my skepticism over 10 years ago, now almost 12 years ago. Just seeing the work that's happened in my previous school, which was a high poverty school. We had reading recovery. And once I saw the work happening in the building, I was sold. So, and my book really is it's its own book, of course, but it really was a combination of your work from Read, Write, Lead, which I still reference, and you can see all the Post-it notes and coffee stains on it. So I regularly come back to that, and as well as cognitive coaching. So I'm not a cognitive coach, but in 2018, I went to a training that used those principles. And around that time was when I kind of conceived the concept of leading like a coach, of marrying these leadership practices with coaching strategies. And that's what the book is. So just to say in short, this book, my book, would not exist without your work, Regie. And if you had not asked, I would have asked you to write the foreword. So,
well, I'm honored to have you say that. And what I most value is, and this has happened to me a lot, and I'm sure to you as well, and a lot of what we'll be talking about today is building relationships, building that culture, building that trust, which has enabled us to grow together, to learn from each other. That's all about it. Talk a little bit about, I know your role right now. You were a principal for 7 years, right? In Mineral Point.
Yep, in Mineral Point, I was an administrator for 15, 16 years.
So you have a different perspective about what it means for whole school change, not just an excellent teacher here or there, but how do you get everybody on board and build that culture of professional learning? And you're not really a supervisor, you're a supporter as a coach. But what does it mean to be a systems coach, and how does that apply for people that are that are not in that role?
Yeah, well, the role's pretty new. In our state, they've created programming now where coaches are coming in from regional education agencies. They're called
Mm-hmm.
CISAs in Wisconsin, and working with schools and district leaders to really look at their systems of why they're getting the results that they're getting,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to mine down to the root cause. What's really going on. So it's really coaching not just the superintendent or principal, but also coaching a leadership team. And really, it comes down to looking at data and finding what's already working instead of trying to implement something new right away. It's
Right.
honoring their culture, it's building trust, um, but also coaching at different levels. So it's coaching a team at a systems level, but it's also working with teachers individually. Just really interesting how these things go up and down. So an issue at an individual teacher level, if they're struggling with, we don't have enough intervention support. For example, if they feel that's the case, well, it's likely a systems issue. That's what's really going on. It could be a core instructional issue, for example. I'm sure you would agree, um, that we need to start there. So I like it. It's interesting. There's a lot of variety, um, and really meeting people where they're at.
You have to be an excellent communicator, to get results because you're working with so many different people at so many different levels. What are
Right.
the techniques and approaches that you have found to be most useful in building trusting relationships and empowering learners, whether they're students or teachers or principals? Because you and I have talked many times about it's all about the trust, it's all about the relationships because we're all fragile to some degree. If somebody comes in and tells us what to do, we don't like that.
Yep.
So, what have you found has worked well for you for building trust and being successful as a coach on all levels?
I think the first one's just being visible and showing up. Um, so I'm working in one school district right now once a week, and I'll just walk around. I'll have my name tag on, but just popping in and just saying hi to everyone. How you doing today? What's going on in your world? That small talk, that small chat, I think is really important, and just making lots of touches, and just being ready for conversation. Whatever they share with me, I'm not trying to fix the problem. I'm just trying to learn and just
Actively
learn more.
listening, it sounds like
Yeah.
too. And you're also seeing them. I talk a lot about that in my book. You're not just, oh, hello, but it's like, I know who you are. You're greeting them by
Yes.
name. And so they're getting comfortable with you.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, that's so important. If I don't have that trust, those relationships, it's not going to happen. So once we do have that relationship, resistance starts to go away, and then we can start to get a little more comfortable with being uncomfortable. So
Mhm.
we'll start to nudge with maybe some questions around some data. I might say, well, I noticed this, in this decision you made, and what did you think about it? How do you feel like it went? And did that align, the result align with what you were hoping you were going to get? So it's not me telling them as much as me first trying to just build more of a reflective thinking in them, and then
Mhm.
also building their
But some
capacity to do.
teachers do too. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
No, yeah, just doing that on their own so that they're, again, becoming more self-directed.
Mhm.
Um,
What would you say, based on all the years of experience that you've had, what are your major learnings for developing and sustaining a thriving school culture? Because I remember when I first started talking about culture, people would roll their eyes. What is culture? We can't be bothered with that. And yet, it is the number one thing for, I believe, for getting a sustainable, equitable school climate, which I equate with culture, so that people feel like they're part of a community and they trust each other, whether it's somebody who's an administrator or a colleague. Um, and this takes years, and that people don't like to hear that, right? Because you were a principal at your school for 7 years, and it took the full 7 years, right, to
yeah.
develop that culture of trust. So how did you do that? And what should people know that are listening that are maybe frustrated that they're in a school that has um, hopefully not a toxic culture, but a culture that's not ideal. What did you find worked?
I think I think first accepting that, like you said, change is not going to happen right away. I mean, change will happen, but achieving that vision is going to take 5 to 7 years. And it really depends on the building. If some building's ready to go and they're ready for change, then it can happen more quickly, 5 years. But yeah, if it's a school that, like my last one where they had 6 principals in the past 10 years, I mean,
Yeah, that doesn't work.
so I mean, I just had to be there for a couple of years and just get to know them and ensure that they could trust that I'm not going to go anywhere. So that's what I did right away in the beginning was I told them, I promise you I'm going to stay here, barring some event. I'm going to be here at least 5 years. So, of course, some people were like, yeah, we'll see. But
Yeah.
I think
It's
making,
so important what you said, because I think that's where superintendents can be involved to make sure that happens, because
yeah,
sometimes principals just get moved around, and people at the higher up that aren't in the classrooms don't realize how disruptive that can be to the culture, especially if the person coming in doesn't respect the culture that's there and
right.
has, moves too quickly to make
Yep.
change.
Yeah. And yeah, moving too quickly. You have to allow for, I've had to allow for that movement. And the movement isn't always just, you see in interventions in progress monitoring, you have these trend lines, and that's not what change looks like. It's, maybe it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. It's very up and down, sometimes nonlinear, especially if you lose teachers. You have to kind of go back to, hiring and making sure you hire well. And how is this person going to fit, they're new within our current culture. So it's definitely not linear, but it's just having faith that we're going to get there, but it may not happen tomorrow.
Talk a
So,
little bit about some specifics. Like, I know you use instructional walks
yep.
to get to know teachers and to build the trust there.
Mhm.
That you start with their strengths. You're not
Yep.
going in to fix them.
No.
Those are big things. So you're really focusing on this person in front of you. And this would be true for administrators as teachers. It doesn't matter what level you're on. Again, it's people want to be seen and heard and
Yeah.
know that you have their best interests at heart. What have you found has been, because we'll have a teacher audience listening, administrators.
Mhm.
What's your best advice? What has worked best for you?
I can tell you what didn't work.
Okay.
What didn't work was when we did not have explicit professional development that focused on practice.
Hey, you have to have
Which
that.
you have to have. It can't be just a book study. It can't be just a 1 day or 2 day training. You buy these curriculum programs and you bring in the trainer and they show you how to use the book, but not how to teach it in classrooms. So my feedback, my instructional walks where I came into classrooms daily to notice what they're doing well and offer ideas for improvement, they dried up when we didn't have explicit professional development. So that's why we love your residency model, the video series, which is one of the best values out there, through Heinemann, because we could see you teaching, we
Mhm.
could watch you teaching. We had the guides, we had the questions and answers. We could talk about it, read an article, and then they were expected to try it. So, for example, we saw classroom libraries being developed with teachers, with kids, and then they were expected to try it. And I could come in and, we were all on the same page. And that's what was so cool about the walks was we were celebrating effort and wins and, wherever they were at, if they were making growth, if they just tried one bin, to do it with the kids, that was a win. And we could celebrate that. It was also an improvement strategy for me, not just the teachers. I would come in and teachers would do it just really interesting ways. It wasn't the same in every room, and I didn't want it to be that way. So the kids would have very interesting ways they wanted to categorize the classroom libraries. I would just say, "Oh, that's so insightful," and then I would be kind of a bee. I would pollinate. I would go to other classrooms and I would say, "Hey, you got to check out what Lori's doing down there. It's really interesting." And now I wasn't giving advice. I was just saying, "Hey, another teacher's doing something interesting. You might want to check it out." So those walks really improved my learning as much as anyone. And
Well, you got a sense of the whole school as
yeah,
a, that was the biggest lesson that I learned when I was doing about 20 years worth of residencies, is that you could have, you could always get a couple of excellent teachers here and there.
right.
To get the whole school, to get that sustainability, that's a whole different thing. You have got to have the whole school involved in
Yeah,
professional learning. And I'm going to jump around a little bit since you mentioned the libraries, because this is one of the things about you and your school that I think is most impressive. And that is the school library project that you have going on. And if you describe that, because that will really give listeners and viewers an idea of what sustainability looks like. We're going to be talking a little bit about collaborative independence in a couple of minutes. But that school library project is, I think, magnificent in
mhm,
terms of how you've gotten kids in the school making decisions that normally the librarian or teachers or the principal would make. Talk
right.
about that and how that happened. I know you have an amazing school librarian, but this will be sustained because these kids have been given the power.
Mhm,
They learned what it was like to control and have agency. It's a beautiful thing.
mhm.
That could not have happened without you getting a sustainable culture going first. So
Yes,
talk about that project and what that means for you and the school and the kids and the teachers, because it's a very unusual uh, collaboration where the kids are leading in
right.
a very important area, the school library.
Yeah, Mickey Uppana, who's the librarian there. I'm actually going to go there on Friday because the kids are going to be going through the libraries and selecting books and giving input. So I'm still partnering with them, which is cool. I can still do that work. But yeah, Mickey started this in 2020, like right after the pandemic started, and just did some small shifts. She would, her first little experiment was putting like popular literature, like Captain Underpants and Dogman, next to slightly more complex texts, and just tried some things. And we did some action research around it, which we called equity projects, just trying to reduce obstacles, increase supports, meet kids where they're at. And just those little wins really build the confidence in the kids and Mickey. And they're like, well, let's try something more. So that's when Mickey saw a blog post from another librarian in Illinois where he had empowered the kids to take control of the school library budget.
That's
Um,
huge.
yeah.
That's not typical.
And so Mickey started doing that and saying, we've got X amount of dollars. And so the kids would audit the school library. They would go through and they would say what books are working for us, what are we missing. Mickey would give them tools to look for like
The fourth
cultural
and fifth graders,
relevance.
interrupt. They were fourth and fifth graders that had to
Yep.
apply for this job, right?
Fourth and fifth graders, it was voluntary. They could volunteer for it, but they had to commit to, yeah, this is the scope of the project. And then some kids decided not to join. Um, but they would develop surveys. They would survey the rest of their school classmates. So peers from kindergarten on up, they would say, what books do we need? Where are some issues where we can improve? The Harry Potter books are worn down. We need new ones. One girl said, I want more books on ADHD because I have it and I want to be able to explain to my friends what it is. And so really just some things we did not expect to see, where they not only were empowered, but they were highly influential and
Mm-hmm.
really identified as leaders. And we call them influencers, kind of like Instagram influencers,
Yeah.
except they're not online. They're influencing their peers to the point now where they were able to raise enough funds through the help of like Bring Me a Book and Lois Bridges, her work that you connected me with, where they were buying stacks of books that were, culturally relevant and high interest and putting them in classroom libraries, saying, here you go,
They
teachers.
essentially took over the
Yeah.
job of what books we need in the library, what books we have, how they should be organized.
Yep.
Um, how did it impact them as readers? And I don't think we've talked about that, but I would guess that there would be way more books checked out, that kids would be
Yep.
reading more because they knew
So,
it was there for one thing.
right. Yeah. They knew which books were there.
And
We saw a large increase. I can't remember the number. It's thousands thousands of books checked out more than when we started. What was interesting was this was kind of a de facto experiment because some kids didn't do the book budget project and some kids did. So the
Oh,
kids who did the book budget project, they checked out 18 more books on average per year over a 2-year span. We measured their engagement levels and they identified more as readers. They more motivated to read than kids who did not do the book budget project. Their reading scores increased by
that-
17%. I mean,
that's
just
fantastic. Yeah. So you
yeah,
have the data that backs up what you
yep,
did.
yep.
The thing
And
that's
it affected everyone. Yeah, it was
the
pretty
thing
much
that struck me about it in the long run, when I look about the politics in our country and how bitterly divided things are, that what we need are citizens who are readers and thinkers and writers and who are not just going to sit back and complain, but will be actively involved intellectually, emotionally, socially with what's going on in the world. And so
right.
to have an experience as a fourth or fifth grader, 9, 10, 11 years old, that actually changes how things work is so powerful.
Hmm.
I'm just so impressed by that. And I know that's part of what you call in your book collaborative independence. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, that comes from the book Engaging Literate Minds by Peter Johnston and colleagues. Actually, quite a few of the Wisconsin teachers were co-authors of that book. So we read that as a book study. And it just means it's similar to interdependence, but just having different priorities with a common goal. So kids had different goals and in their own kind of agenda going into the book budget project, but we were all aiming toward the same
Yeah.
vision, which is more empowered, more agentic readers, and like you said, more informed and active citizens. We don't know yet what that's going to look like, as they grew up, but
But they would, there's all the intangibles too that you couldn't measure
right,
in terms of learning how to work in a group. How do you measure that in terms of, uh, I would imagine that they became more understanding of each other. They got to know each other.
yeah,
Um, so very powerful, and just think that work is it will require a very strong librarian like the one you
yes,
have to keep it going.
yes,
But
yeah,
I think the kids would clamor for it and they would be able to help a new librarian. Here's what you need to do. Because they're
yeah,
really running it right now, right?
yeah.
With
That's a
her
good
help.
that's a good point. And I think, when I continue to work with them, I think going through some like documentation, let's
Hmm.
really break down what we did,
Hmm.
to share with others, but also so make sure we have a sustainable system so that whoever comes in there, like this is how we do things here, and that's the culture is
Hmm.
here's how we do things around here, but in the most positive sense.
Absolutely. Um, since I've known you over 12 years, you have changed quite a lot as um, I would say personally, professionally, in every way. You show your vulnerability and openness more. Um, how has that, your own personal growth, how has that changed you as a coach and a leader? Because when we first started working together, and you could talk about your skepticism a little bit in terms of, I don't really remember what your skepticism was. You only told me about that recently.
Yeah,
But you have become, I would say, much more open, more vulnerable, more accepting of people where they are, the people that you're working with. And that has changed the culture of the places where you work. Um, and I think our relationship has changed. It's warmer, more loving. We know each other well. Um, what might you like to say about that? Because you took a risk in terms of um, becoming an active listener more than, okay, I'm the principal and I'm here to evaluate you. That was a big shift over the
yeah,
years.
yeah.
And if you don't answer that, you don't have to.
No, I can remember one incident where a couple teachers brought down a feedback for me. They had collected some comments from other teachers, and this was earlier in my administrative career. And there's just this long list of all the complaints they had, and then there was this one comment on the left side of something positive I had done, and it felt like it was almost like a token compliment. But I think I realized at that point that I was trying to control outcomes and I was trying to get results immediately and not through the teachers. And so I've slowly shifted to,
Well, you came to trust your teachers. You
yeah,
gave up some control, which is hard to do. I'm a controlling person. I think all of us who go into a space where there's a classroom and we have a voice,
yeah.
very easy just to take over,
Well,
right?
we have these expectations on us, we got to get scores up. We've got to
Yeah.
look good. And that means we're trying to look good, then we're not really improving our learning. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something I've done more so in my writing and talking and my coaching,
Absolutely.
is talking about my mistakes openly
Yeah.
and kind of life lessons I've gained. That seems like it creates a permission structure for other people to say, oh, yeah, this happened to me too. And this is what I learned from it. So leadership's so much about, the gaining trust by to giving it, you know. Let's see
As
what
we have
happens.
talked
Try it
about
out.
many times, it's all about relationships, right? Without that trusting relationship, you can't really do that much.
Mm.
One of the, and the reason that I know that you were very successful as a principal is that people were sad to see you go. It wasn't like, oh, thank God he's gone. They were
Yeah,
upset that you were
yeah,
leaving because the
maybe
school.
one or two were, but no, I'm just
Well,
kidding.
but the school was in a very good place in
Yeah.
terms of very trusting culture and strong relationships
Yes.
between colleagues, between you and school, the wonderful library project.
Yeah.
One of the things I admire about you very much is the way you continue to grow professionally and personally. So, talk about your own role in reading and writing and professional learning, and mention also you have an excellent newsletter, Read by Example, could be called Lead by Example too.
Mhm.
You're talking about literacy and leadership issues K-12. It's just a great newsletter. And in your last one, which I just read, was the art of giving feedback, which is so important. And then the one before that was what does it take to be a confident coach? So you're picking really good questions that all of us that are interested in increasing our professional knowledge and growth are interested in. So people should know about your newsletter. They can sign up. You can tell them how to do that if you like.
Yeah, if you go to readbyexample.substack.com, you can sign up there. Most of it's free. I do have a paywall, mostly just for comments. And if people want to participate in the community, we have a monthly Zoom session where we'll talk about an article. We just did your book, The Heart Center Teachers, a book study, and talked about that. So it's more, yeah, most of the content's free and they pay for the community. If that makes sense. So, but yeah,
But you make it a priority to,
mhm,
even for new teachers who are overwhelmed, I think it's really important that they're part of professional learning.
yep,
Part of book study is maybe too much for some people, but reading a professional article is certainly doable and talking about it really important. And you've been an excellent model for that because you're just a continual learner, and not just and you're reading fiction and nonfiction, and you're very open about sharing what you're reading and what your opinions are about books. So you're modeling what it means to be a reader and a writer,
right.
which is great. How would you just say a few words about, we're getting close to the end of our time.
Mhm.
How has reading and discussing books, fiction and nonfiction, how has that contributed to your becoming more responsive to learners?
I value reading and writing, so I do it regularly, especially the reading. I think just doing it, just the behaviors have shaped
Mhm.
my beliefs, right? Um, I-
Well, and also, let me help you out here because I know this
yeah,
is true for you. We know from the research that people that read more fiction tend
yeah,
to be more empathetic, and we need more empathy in our culture
oh, for
today,
sure.
right?
Yeah,
We're
and I
very.
and I tend. Oh, I was just gonna say I tend to read more nonfiction,
Mhm.
so I will monitor that. I use Goodreads, but I can see, well, what books have I been reading lately, and if it's like three nonfiction books, it's like, okay, put a pause on that.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm just reading to procrastinate. I need to do some work now. But then I'll pick up, a couple of fiction books. I've gotten into audiobooks. I do more travel now, so that's given me an opportunity to listen to like your excellent audiobook, but also a lot of fiction,
Yeah.
and just really appreciate that part of literature and being literate. So yeah, it's for sure empathy, perspective taking. I think an area gap for me as a reader is just reading about from persons of color,
Mm,
authors, stories. That's something I just haven't had a lot of exposure to. So
mhm.
just really trying to widen my lens, my perspective, and yeah,
Yeah,
just
we
continue
all
to
need to
grow.
do that. Yeah, absolutely. Um, Closing our conversation today, what's your best advice for educators today, whether they're teachers, coaches, principals, or superintendents, or just at the district level? Because you've been at all levels, starting as a teacher to working at the administrative level now to working with multiple districts as a systems coach. Um, what advice would you give to anyone who's in our professional?
Mhm. One word comes to mind: prioritize.
Oh yeah.
Prioritize, and not just I'm going to pick these one or two things, but I'm going to say no to these five or
Uh-huh.
six things today, because if I don't prioritize, I try to do three things a day, um, and try to get those three things done. So podcast with Regie was one of those today. That means I'm not doing those other things. I'm going to either delay them, I'm going to
Mhm.
delegate them, or I'm going to decline them, because we can't do it all. So I keep a journal. It's right here, and I'll jot down, things that are happening, what I'm doing. Helps me to be mindful about, how am I feeling about it? Is it frustrating? What's the friction? And just analyzing my tasks. Like, is this what I want to be working on? Is this getting me toward my goals? And if not, then I have to find ways to decline it. But and then asking for help too. I've not always been great about that, but um, yeah, making sure I'm not trying to do it all alone. And
Well, you've gotten very good at self-reflection, which I think is hard. It's hard to
Mhm.
look at our own behaviors and say, well, yeah, I'm doing pretty well in this area, but not so good over here. And what kind of changes can I make? And that vulnerability, I think, is what makes it possible to work with other people, that everybody's vulnerable in some way. And it's so important as us as educators to make everybody feel seen and welcome. And the school is really a haven or needs to be a haven, a sanctuary for not just kids, but for principals too.
Well, and
Um,
you've done such a good job of that, Regie, modeling that. Since I've known you, you've always talked about, prioritizing life beyond school and
yeah.
reading for pleasure. You have your book, your What I'm Reading blogs, which I love reading. But you live it too. You're baking at home, you're gardening, you're living a full life, and that's something I've tried to emulate. And in your new book, you talk a lot about that too. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Matt, for this conversation. I think many people will benefit from hearing your wise words and your journey, and great to be together.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Steve.